are anxious, people are depressed, people are working too hard, people are sometimes, we get injured from time to time, people get angry as well. You see, these are all very, very prominent things, and they all deplete soma, which leads to a depletion of ojas, and as we mentioned, ojas is the power back of the mind-body complex. You've got to maintain a certain level of ojas at all times, otherwise you will run into problems, disease, or even death. If there's a problem that this ojas, a certain percentage, that's requirement, baseline requirement, they call this, there's a name for it, Ardhanjali Pramana Ojas. It is required, it's distributed throughout the body, and it's flowing through what we call nadis. Nadis are the, srotas, the currents throughout the body. And this acts as a natural power backup for the body. If there's a problem, we might call it your immune system. One thing that's been demonstrated in Ayurveda is that if there is if there's low pH, there's also low ojas. And if there's high pH, there's also good ojas, good amount. But that's just an interesting observation. So it coordinates and connects all physical systems within the body. Therefore, we have to actually worry about these things. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada can say as boldly as he does, that we depend on Krishna's mercy for all these things to function properly, because it's not going to happen in this Kali Yuga. Otherwise, things are completely haywire. It's a very good thing that there is Krishna, and that he's ultimately the one who's supplying the Shakti to all these things. Therefore, he says, let's go back to verse 13. You'll recognize the words here. Gam avishya cha bhutan. Gam avishya cha. I enter into the earth. Bhutani dharayami. And I sustain all the living entities. How? Ojasa. Through ojas. Through ojas. Now it makes a little more sense, doesn't it? Through ojas I do this. It's a very, very deep topic. There are many, many, many volumes written on this topic. And, it's very easy to gloss over it because Bhagavad Gita is not really meant to explain that sort of thing in such detail. But it can be explained. And I mentioned already, Pushnami. Krishna says, I nourish. This is the nature of the soma energy, and is the function of the ojas within the body. Pushnami choshathi sarvaha. Now, where do the vegetables get their potency? Where do the herbs that we get all medicines from, whether it's allopathy or Ayurveda, you get it ultimately from plants, you see? So where do they get their potency? That's kind of like asking, where do the senses get their potency? Right? What the Upanishads, the Shruti mantras actually ask this question. What is the seeing power that makes the eyes see? What is that hearing power that makes the ears hear? Right? There are many things we can say about that, but the very potency of the senses, the very potency of all elements, and even these demigods, Krishna is entering in within the demigods also and enlivening them. In every way, he's got all the bases covered. So somo bhutva rasatmakaha. So somo rasatmakaha, it says here in the Bhagavad Gita. Somo rasatmaka. This soma is full of rasa, and rasa is that nourishing property. I mentioned already in the Charak Samhita, it said oja somatmakaha. Oja is somatmaka, but soma is rasatmaka. Is it making sense? Do you all understand this term, or do I need to translate? Oja somatmaka means that this ojas that we've been describing, it is of the nature of somas. It is full of somas, of soma, the cooling, soothing, nourishing properties that come mainly from the moon. Because remember, we're discussing three things here. Moon, sun, fire. So the moon is very, very important in the modern day and age because we are depleted of the natural and beneficial properties of the moon through injudicious lifestyle mainly. So oja somatmaka, although the oja is full of soma, what is soma full of? Somo rasatmakaha. This is what Krishna says in this verse. Soma is full of rasa, and rasa means what? Nectar. What else does rasa mean? Think Taittiriya Upanishad. Those who are learned will know. Huh? Raso Vaisa. This Supreme Absolute Truth Himself is that rasa. Akhila Rasamrita Murti, in the language of Srila Rupa Goswami. He is the ocean of all rasa. Even that rasa that we require to sustain ourselves physically. What to speak of emotionally and otherwise. And mark well, the moon is also in charge of what?
Mind.
Your emotions, your mind. Therefore, when Saturn sits on your moon, that's called Sarde Sati. Everybody knows what happens when you're in Sarde Sati. Because the Saturn is suffocating that property of the moon to make you feel comfortable, basically. That's how it works. Okay, so these are a few thoughts that we can elaborate on here. Commentators are all pretty simple on these points. Ramanujacharya says a few things. Basically he's just reiterating the same points. Prithvyascha bhuta dharinya dharakatva shaktir madhya ityaha. He says that Krishna is telling us that the potency for bearing us all is coming from Him, and through the activities of the earth's bhuta dharini. What is bhuta dharini? The potency to sustain all living beings. Earth is called, we've mentioned several times in the last several days, not dhatri. What do we call the earth? Dharati. Yeah, dharati. So it means it's all coming from this dhatu. And the verbal root dhri actually means to sustain. You see? And dharma also means to sustain. And dharma also means the intrinsic property of a thing. So the intrinsic property of this lunar energy, we can say, is, soma, and the intrinsic property of sona is rasa, and the intrinsic property of rasa is Krishna. Shri Krishna ki jai. He's called, Rasamrita Murti. All right, we don't want to dilate too much on that. But one of the other things that we can explain here is that there are 4 kinds of foodstuffs that this fire of digestion within our stomachs. Actually, the word deham is glossed by commentators such as Baladev Vidyabhushan here as udaram. What does udaram mean? Stomach, yeah. Deha actually means body, but in this context, he takes it as udara. It's interesting because Srila Prabhupada translates it here as, I think he also says bodies. It's not incorrect. In the bodies. So either way, you want to look at it, it still works. But the idea is that pranapana samayuktaha pachami annam chaturvidham praninam deham ashrataha. Taking shelter of the stomachs of all the pranis. Prani means the living entities. What does prani literally mean? Someone who subsists on prana. That's why we have, not this one. Generally, we want to drink spring water because spring water still has prana within it. As soon as what do they do to water nowadays? They irradiate water, and they do so many things to water. When I was in college, and this is nearly 2 decades ago, we went on a field trip to a local sewage treatment plant, and they showed us how the water coming out of our taps was actually, highly, highly chlorinized and otherwise treated sewage. What you flush down your toilet, that's the same thing that's coming out of your tap, most likely. I don't know if they do this in Sacramento, but in most big cities in the United States and wherever these big cities exist, that's what they do. So we were talking about water wars this morning. The basic necessities of life, fire, moon, sun, water, air, they're all being depleted, or they're being effaced to such a degree, their dharma is being effaced, to such a degree that we can hardly derive benefit from them. Therefore, it's advisable, if you want water that's actually got some life in it, then you have to drink pure spring water. So that's what that's something we can think about with the word prani. So in the stomachs of all the pranis, I take shelter, and having become Vaishvanara, this fire of digestion, I have this pachaka property. I can cook things within your stomach. And how does he do that? Prana, apana, samayukta, along with prana and apana, the breath. Breath is very important. Therefore, the air is also very important. You have to breathe good air. And that also, people are going to be, I mean, I actually saw some research that was done, cutting edge research. I think it was a Chinese company or something. They were researching the idea of putting big bubbles out in the middle of the, floating bubbles in the ocean, and just having an artificial environment way out there, where you can have, you know, just an air supply drawn from the oxygen in the ocean. Pretty surreal stuff. Kali Yuga is just full of wonders. Anyway, so Krishna says, prana pana samayukta, by his own achintya shakti. This is the point. He's able to do all these wonderful things. Basically, he is sustaining us on all ends. That's why I repeated the sentence. He produces the grains, and he allows us to digest those grains. He gives us the intelligence in the next verse we read, text 15, how to cook those grains. If you can go home and you remember how to cook dinner for your family, thank your stars or thank the Supreme Lord, because he's giving that intelligence. Usually he defers to our own karma. Prarabdha karma is the karma which is on the docket for experience within this life. But, you know, he can change that also if he wants to. I watched this happen with my mother, the Mata Smritir Dhyanam Apohanam Cha, because she had dementia. And her memory span eventually was about 3 days. And it's pretty hard to deal with a person like that. It creates all kinds of problems. So, you know, if we can remember how to drive and so many other things, don't take it for granted, because it's not. It is going to be lost. You're going to lose that ability. We think that, you know, when we hear the idea that, like Shankaracharya said, Nalani dalagata jalamati taralam tadvad jivita matashaya chapalam. This life is as tenuous as a drop of water on a lotus leaf. We think, oh yeah, that means that I can be in a car accident. No, not necessarily. What happens if you wake up tomorrow and can't move the left side of your body because you've not been eating properly? And you've developed so much amavisha within your system that it doesn't work anymore. It's finally shut down. Or, you know what, I mean, there's so many things that can happen in this world, and they do. So we need to recognize that we're living, if we've got everything in good order right now, just use that opportunity while you can, because it will be taken away from you. That is absolutely assured, positively assured. You will lose these assets. It's just a matter of time. We go on forever. The intelligence that we assume reincarnates with us is not necessarily so. We may be intelligent enough to discriminate what to do, what not to do now. But what about in some future state? Even in this life, I've seen people change radically. Shall I tell you a shocking story? Yes. When I was in Houston, there was a pious family who would come to the Hare Krishna temple every Sunday. So they had a teenage daughter who was very enthusiastically attending the arati, and blissful as they are at that age. Young teens. And, you know, eventually as she matured, you know, the forces of nature do what they do. So she fell in love with one boy that the family didn't approve of, because the boy was a Muslim. And in a conservative Gujarati family, that usually doesn't fly. So, somehow or other, you know, despite all discouragement, they decided that they were just too strongly attached, and they eloped together. And, you know, the family was completely outraged. I mean, you know, in some parts of the world, they have these honor killings about that sort of thing, isn't it? So something to think about there as well. But they didn't go that far, but they were really not very happy with her and didn't really facilitate her very much. So she had to live with this boy, you know, because of his character or because of her karma, who's to say. But there was alcohol involved, and then eventually some drugs. And then she got involved in hard drugs, heroin, became addicted. And then naturally, because that was the character of the boy, he left her alone, and she had nothing. because she was completely dependent and had not planned very well. So then she found herself moving from friend to friend to friend to friend, and eventually she burnt out all her friends because you can't trust a junkie. What do? They steal from everybody. You cannot trust them. So, eventually she was out on the street. And what do you do when you're female and out on the street and addicted to heroin? You do whatever you have to do, isn't it? And that's what she did. And she started to sell herself just to maintain this habit. Then it doesn't stop there. The last time, she can't, the devotees tried to be nice to her and tried to give her a chance, but she was, again, just like she'd burned out all her friends, she burned out all the devotees, stole things, and it was so many problems. So, she found herself there, and the last time I saw her in the temple, she was standing in a corner of the prasadam room, facing the wall. And her hair was it looked like, you don't know who Medusa was, but, just all over the place. And, her jeans were filmy with oil and dirty and unwashed, and she was babbling incoherently, completely insane. This can happen to anyone. And I've seen, I've seen quite a few wonderful things. And all the people who come to me with their problems, I've heard quite a few wonderful things as well. The point is that we should not take for granted what we have, because it is not granted. This is the point. We've got some tenuous karmic balance that's being temporarily held in suspension, because that's the way it is supposed to play out for now. It has nothing to do with our own endeavor, or the lack of it. Everything likitam apilalate pronsiktam kasamartha. The Hitopadesh tells us, whatever is written on your forehead, that is what's going to play itself out during your life. They say that there's an indelible barcode